Officially, welcome to Learning in Actions, Heal the Divide Podnar series. And today our topic is coaching at the edge, vertical development, AI, and coaching. And I'm with my guest and close friend, Jen Ryback, and I'm so glad to be doing this with her today. And I'll be giving her a proper introduction in just a moment. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, who knows when it comes to Jan and I? Because our conversations tend to go like all over, which is awesome. We're definitely going to talk about the basic principles of vertical development. What does development as a habit mean? Where does vertical development meet artificial intelligence? Maybe what are some tips for coaching individuals at different stages of development? Maybe if Jan feels called, she'll do a demo, which I'm happy to do if we want to do that. And then we'll talk about how to use elements of vertical development to help clients find their growth edge. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Jan Ryback. She's been working in the space of personal and professional development most of her adult life, which she says is a long time. She has built and led enterprise-wide coaching and leadership development programs within public, private, healthcare, and commercial sectors, and held leadership roles at Korn Ferry's U.S. government business, ICF International, which I did not know, digital mobilizations, and her own consulting firm, Edgewise. She's a partner with the VMI, a next generation vertical development tool that brings together adult development and artificial intelligence and different forms of coaching, making transformative development scalable, accessible, and affordable. With that, hi, Jan.
Hey, folks.
How are you?
Great. I'm doing great. I see so many of my dear friends here. So I'm feeling like this is old home week and new friends and people have been reaching out. And so this is just really great. And I am going to say up front that this topic tends to generate a lot of questions and a lot of interest. And so please reach out afterwards by email, text, probably better email than LinkedIn, just because I don't get to that as often. And I'm always happy to have a longer conversation. So consider this just a spark. So let me just say a little bit about what vertical development is, where it comes from, since I'm assuming that we have largely practitioners on this call, correct? Mm-hmm. So I can geek out a little bit, which is always a fun place to go. And so vertical development and how that term has evolved and why we're still using that, I'm not exactly sure. It's been around for a while. But vertical development is also the same as what was known as adult stage development, ego construct development, adult development theory. Those are all different terms. Even there's some elements of integrative, integral coaching and integral development in there, which is where I think you get the somatic and the ontological stuff, Thibaut. And it's been around for a while. It's not exactly new. It's been around for, I'd say, 4 or 5 decades. Largely based on the work of, Libby, based on the work of Jane Levenger. It's also got some connection with the work of Levinson and some other theorists. Bob Keegan and Suzanne Cook-Reuter and Bill Torbert were all people who built off of Jane Levenger's work. So there's a whole family tree there about this work. And it's been largely out of the world of developmental psychology and stuck in academia for a very long time until recently, until the past five, maybe 10 years. And what it speaks to is this idea that there's actually a predictable pattern of stages that we grow through in adulthood. And just like if you're familiar with Piaget's work in child development, just like the brain of children grow in childhood to allow them to be able to consider things with more nuance, greater complexity as they grow. We as adults continue to grow also. And the pattern of development is not the same in brain structure as with kids, though. It's more in how we make sense of things. Or we're using the term mindset. Bob Keegan uses the term forms of mind. Bill Torbett uses the term action logics, all the same concept. And that concept is sort of like software upgrade, software. We've got the hardware of our brain and our enteric system, which is your gut system, which actually has more neurotransmitter sites than your brain. We've got this whole, and your proprioceptors, which is your muscles. We've got this whole hardware network. The software, or the mind, is what puts all that together in different ways. And that actually grows. And the way it grows is it expands in its capacity to be able to hold, understand, empathize, respond, see with greater capacity. So we're not limited by one narrative or one way of understanding things. So as we grow vertically, in this term vertically, what we're doing is we're expanding our capacity to see things with greater range, so we're not so grabbed up by our experience. So you know the whole, I mean, for all coaches on this call, we all know about this idea of reactive versus responsive, right? When we're reactive, we're grabbed up by an experience and we're stuck in it, and it drives us. When we're responsive, we have an experience, we've got some distance from it. So we're not so grabbed up by it, and we can actually make a choice about what's going to be the best way to respond to that situation. And as we expand in this way, we have greater capacity to do that and to take in different cues and understand the environment and understand the systems and understand the way the systems within the systems work together. And we can navigate that with greater skill and greater composure. And
would it
also
be useful,
great.
sorry, for me to put up a slide just to anchor that brilliance? Okay. Sometimes, at least for me anyway, it's easier.
I know I sent you a bunch.
Yeah,
Great, let's go to the one before.
This one?
Yeah, before, the common thread. So those of you who know anything about this field know that there's several really genius thought leaders out there. Bob Keegan, Suzanne Cook-Reuter, who's my mentor, Bill Torbett, Terry O'Fallon's doing some work in this area too. Certainly Theo Dawson's doing some work in this field. So they have different ways of coming at this. The common thread with all of these is that all of these thought leaders is that there's a predictable pattern of stages of expanding mindset that builds greater range and awareness of response, enabling more capacity to hold experience, thoughts, and emotion. So we're not just talking about the brain, how we think. We're talking about emotion, we're talking about experience, we're talking about physical sensation as object without being unwittingly subjected to their effect. So we have some space between ourselves and experience, and allowing for an increased ability to navigate complexity, adapt to continuous change, and more skillfully apply competencies. So the connection here with competencies is, we often think of competencies as being horizontal. You know, you build a skill, and capacity being vertical, you build this capacity. They're actually very tightly interconnected. And honestly, I think we've just kind of made up, it's an artificial distinction, but we need that. So for instance, you can build a skill like listening. We know listening is a skill. We train leaders on how to listen better. If you pay attention and you start listening and you let that listening change you, affect you, you really listen, it starts to expand your capacity to understand people differently and to empathize. So that actually can grow vertically too, grow capacity while also building that skill. And also, if you build capacity so you can see things from different points of view, you can be more skillful in how you apply certain skills because you can better understand the context. So they're very interwoven.
Bo is asking a question about if there's a relationship between Gail Sheehy's work in passages and new passages in this work.
Probably. I'm not as familiar with Gail Sheehy's work, but I think it's very similar to Levinson's work, right, around the passages and stages and of seasons. And yes, it doesn't necessarily have as much correlation to age, although age can play a factor. And certainly the older you are, the more time you've had to try to expand your mindset. But it's not necessarily connected. But yeah, I mean, these frameworks, there's been versions of these forever.
Yeah. So where do you want to go next on this conversation? I mean, I think if I know a bit about vertical development from our conversations in the past, I'm feeling like, do you have in one of those slides, like what the stages of development are?
Yeah, let's go to those slides with the circles, and they're actually animated. So, okay, so if we walk through the different stages, and I'm just going to give you my little improvisational dance through the stages. So we're just going to touch briefly on the opportunist mindset. And if you think of these almost like nesting dolls or rings of a tree, it's very helpful rather than going vertical. So the opportunist mindset is actually what we call pre-conventional. And the reason is because it doesn't show up much in our day-to-day world. Most people crash and burn at this mindset. And it's one that isn't highly functional. It's one that is kind of like my way or the highway. You do what I say or else you're the opportunist mindset is extremely focused on protecting themselves in every way. Everything in this mindset feels like an existential threat. So often people who are at this mindset, if they can't manipulate a situation, they go someplace else. But it's important to bring up because it's in the framework. We haven't had anyone assess at this in any of the assessments I've done around vertical development. But what's helpful to know is that every mindset does have a strength of some sort. And the strength of the opportunist mindset is it's very good at sussing out threat. The problem is that they see everything as a threat. But, you know, if your life is really in danger, it doesn't hurt to actually go to a place of, and we might regress to this point of it, I'm protecting myself at all costs. So the next mindset that we expand from opportunist, if for any reason you can get the opportunist person to actually work in a coaching engagement, which is not often the case. But the diplomat mindset is one in which we feel most safe and most okay about ourselves when we know we belong. And we do what we can to belong at all costs. So it's really important at this mindset to be defined by the group. This is different than, say, someone who's very socially attuned later stage and is really focused on the larger group and is doing everything they can to support it. This is more, if I don't belong, I'm nobody. So it's an intense sense of security that comes from belonging. And you'll see them, their loyalty is the strength of this mindset. The downside of this mindset is they don't know who they are separate from the group. And you would see this in highly bureaucratic organizations. You see this in certain kinds of clubs. It's really important in some situations that we belong, that we do things like everybody else has or that has been done in the past. The risk with it is that sometimes we want to be more than what the group is, and we might come up against that sense of, well, if I stand up for who I am and what I believe in, then where will I go? And, will I disappear? What would that be like? And yes, like adolescence in the West, very much so. Sororities, fraternities. What happens with this mindset is at the edge of this mindset is either somebody taps us, you can move on to expert, somebody taps us, or we feel this urge inside to stand out, to make a name for ourselves, to claim an area of expertise or a skill set or something that gives us a sense of being different. And this is where we go when we learn a trade, we go to school, we go to graduate school, we identify what we really want to do, what we feel skilled at, and we dive in with that. And with this mindset, the focus is on, or I define myself based on what I know and what I do. What I know and what I do. With this mindset, there's a strong focus on details, technical expertise, things that give us a sense of grounding, something we can hold on to. Like if I know if I get to this level, I will be seen as someone who knows something. I will have a sense of competence. I think of this example of one of my kids who is, he's 28 and he's really, really good technically, like data scientist. And he also is a really good people person. So he gets out of college and he's immediately running a team and managing Scrum Master. And he's like, they put me here, but I don't feel like this is the right place. I want to go back and actually figure out how to do this, get some technical skill so I don't feel like I'm bullshitting everybody. And also he recognizes that he needed to go and get this expert mindset, and he's following a path that gives him, if I get to this credential, then I will have the confidence to actually be leading a team. So that's what happens with the expert mindset is, another example for the expert mindset is how it might show up in a culture is like when I go to work with healthcare, I do a lot of work with doctors who have become executives, and I make sure it says in my bio that I taught for a semester at a major Ivy League school, not because I'm an academic and I care that much about that job. It was a fun gig, but it's not my career. But I know to them, it's going to mean something because credentials like that matter to them. And that was going to give me the cred to come in and talk about stuff that they didn't feel so comfortable talking about. So what happens with the expert mindset is we get really good at this skill and we get tapped to, guess what? Lead a team, lead a group. You're really good at that. You should be leading the team. And so we get put in front of a team and we start telling them what to do. Why? Because we know what to do. We know how to be right. And turn around and say, well, you gave me a bunch of idiots. I mean, they don't know what they're doing. I tell them what to do. They don't do it. And I'm stuck having to do all the work. What's the deal? So then you get to come up to this expert turning achiever. I'm going to go to achiever next and say, well, would you rather be right? Would you rather be effective? To which you might say, oh, I thought being right was being effective, but you have a good point there. Maybe to be effective, I need to be able to talk to these folks and make sure that they actually hear me. So this is where we're moving into the world of emotional and social intelligence, right? You can recognize that. And often the work between expert and achiever is very much the work of emotional and social intelligence, where we pay attention to how what I say doesn't necessarily mean that's what they hear. So how will I know I'm being effective? What is it they need to hear from me to get on board? The achiever mindset is one of high energy, high agency. It's about setting goals. It's about working hard to achieve those goals. It's about bringing people along to get to those goals. So it's a time where we're focused on things like speech acts, which we all know about, or ways of engaging people so they understand what the goal is and what they need to do to get there. It's a stage where we start working more deliberately with feedback. By the way, the expert mindset hates feedback unless you're going to tell them how right they are. The achiever mindset, they will take it as long as you're helping them understand. And I'm being totally generalizing here, but as long as you help them understand how this feedback is going to help them achieve the goal. So the achiever mindset is all about responsibility. It's all about getting things done. It's all about hitting the marks and celebrating. And a sense of identity is caught up with that responsibility. So the redefining mindset is at the edge of achiever. What happens is that we get so good at hitting these goals that we tend to get a lot of responsibility dumped on us. And sometimes we don't know how to say no. And sometimes we keep hitting the goals, and at a point, it doesn't work the same as it used to. It doesn't give us the same feeling of excitement and enjoyment. Where we come up against this big question of what matters more, achievement or fulfillment? And that's where many of us start onto this journey, which you might think of as the dark night of the soul, or a journey of questioning of who am I if I'm not always meeting these goals? What is it that really matters to me in the bigger sense? So the redefining mindset is one of exploration. It's one of inquiry. It's one of curiosity. This is where the ontological stuff, TiVo, comes in, the idea of what was I put here to do? The work that happens in coaching here is a lot of mindfulness. It's understanding more of the both and, how to hold both and. We do a lot of work with polarities here. A lot of work around learning to read ourselves and what else matters to us. The redefining mindset is a very hard mindset stage to grow through because it often asks us to challenge assumptions we've had about ourselves and why we're here. It challenges relationships. It challenges career choices. It challenges many things about what we assumed about ourselves. And we're waking up to what more is possible. Think of it as that we are, the scaffolding we use to rest our sense of self on becomes rickety, to make space for new ways of seeing that self. So we do this work of redefining, which is a lot of hard work. It's a great mindset. It's a great time to get a coach, to work with a mentor, to work with a spiritual director. And what happens is that we go through this mindset stage, we develop much more empathy for others because we go through pain ourselves, we experience different emotions ourselves. And on the other side of that, we get to this mindset where there's so much more space because we've worked through these limits of assumptions about ourselves and what we take ourselves to be and others. And we get to this transforming mindset where it's almost like coming home to a greater sense of who we are and what's possible. Think of it as going up to the balcony and being able to look down on yourself and the ecosystem, as Jennifer Garvey Berger's calling it, of who we are and what we are involved with and the way systems work with systems. And we can see it with some distance now because we've done all this work to understand ourselves and our systems more intensely. And we can also go back and work these other mindsets because we've moved through them and we get them. So we've got this range. And we also have a sense of ease and comfort that comes with this transforming mindset. So one of the risks of the transforming mindset is one of arrogance, or what feels like arrogance, or distance. And the beauty of it is that we've just got greater range. And we're also building, the work of this mindset is very much about building compassion, which I think of as empathy with legs. You know, I can empathize, but then how do I bring that into my interactions and the way I am with people? And the other piece of work in the transforming mindset is one of clarity. How do I clearly define what I can see so others can get it? And I'm going to stop there because I just dumped a whole lot on you. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions.
Yeah. So I'm loving how you are putting it in a circle that way. From the inside out, it feels to me like it takes a lot of judgment out of it. I'm not sure why that lands on me that way, and it is. So you've got an instrument, the VMI, that will help people understand what's the right way to level stage, what stage they're at, and once people know the stage, what's the value of knowing that once they know, and then what is to do about it once you know it?
Yeah, great, Allison. So yeah, we've got this tool called the Vertical Mindset Indicator, and this is where the AI comes in. Because there are some fabulous tools out there like the MAP, the Mature Adult Profile. If anyone went to Georgetown, you know about that. And the Global Leader Profile, which is Bill Torbert's version of the same instrument, and Stages, which is Terry O'Fallon's version of the instrument, and the Subject-Object Interview. They're all great assessments. They are all manually scored, and thus they are expensive and takes a long time to get them back. And what we've done, and also you get a lot of information that people don't necessarily need all that information at once, because the thing about vertical growth is that you want to find just that one particular edge, that very clear edge, and grow at that edge. It's an experiential process. It's not a thinking process. You can't read your way into another stage. You have to you have to live it. You have to get beaten up by it. You have to stretch into it, build the neurotransmitters that allow you to consider things in different ways and step back. And so that's experiential. So you want to get very clear about that. So we were thinking, let's come up with something that's going to help people find that just very small, specific edge. And also that allows them to hold stage lightly while taking this growth seriously. And the reason we say that is because when you invest $1,000, $1,500 in an assessment, which is what these assessments cost, the other ones cost, and you sit down with a coach for 90 minutes or 2 hours, you take it very seriously as if it means something about you. And what we wanted to do was instead invite people to stumble into the learning themselves. So we can do that using AI. And the reason why we can do that is, number one, we've got a tool where we use a smaller portion of the larger instrument scored using AI. You get an indication of mindset tendency. So it's just a suggestion of where you might be based on how you responded to these 9 sentence stems. And then you go through, so it's an experience, not an assessment. You do that, and then you go through a digital debrief process where you answer 6 to 8 different questions that helps you figure out, what does this actually mean for you? How does this show up in your life? And what does this mean for what might be the edge?
Yeah. It's very slick, by the way. So I've taken this. It is very, very slick, and it doesn't take long to take, and it identified me at a stage, and then helped me see, based on the stage I'm in, where is my growth edge? What's my next opportunity to grow into, if I were to grow to just like the next step, not like all the steps all at the same time, but just the next one. How might I lean into that? Yeah, it's very slick.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's the idea. That's exactly what we're about with this, is having you stumble into it and identify that, and then live into that experience. And I believe it was Jackie who had the question about what are some of the things, exercises to do to actually grow vertically. And what we found is there's actually 4 factors for vertical growth. One is you need heat experiences or catalytic experiences that are so hot, you have to drop your habitual ways of thinking, doing, and feeling to pick up something different.
Can you give an example, Jan?
One example is you need to delegate to others, but darn, what if they don't get it right? And your name is on that project, but yet you need to do it. and it's visible. And yet you're going to need, so how might you empower, trust, communicate in a way, and then track with people and let go of judgment so that you can communicate and they feel safe experimenting, iterating. That's one example. Another great example of heat is lead a team that you don't know anything about. You're not an expert in that area, but it's more about leading the team and getting people on board, and it's visible. So the things for heat needs to be visible, needs to be uncomfortable, needs to have some element of risk.
Mhm.
And you pick up something different and you live into it.
The other thing I feel like I learned in doing it, and this is, I'm not the expert in vertical development that you are by any means, but I thought like, oh, if I could just reach the transforming stage, it's like, I've reached enlightenment or whatever, and I could like stay there. But what I learned from going through your tool, your process, is that no, we actually have to come down in stages sometimes to meet people where they are. It's not like being at the highest stage and staying there.
Mm-hmm.
But actually I need to come down and meet people where they are at times.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what we talk about range. And what we're finding is, so up until recently, the real focus on vertical development, a lot of people have gone there. How do I get people to these later stages? Because those are the ones that can deal with complexity. And what we're finding is, in reality, it's much more mixed than that. Yes, later mindset does provide greater capacity for dealing with complexity. And we still need to work with things that involve details, technical expertise, setting goals. If you work for a public company, darn, you better be setting those goals, metrics, because that's what you need to deliver. So we talk about range. And really the best is not being later stage, but having a fit between the mindset stage that you're at and your environment and what's being asked of you. And that's what we do in the digital debrief process, is we really focus on what is your situation or your challenges asking of you in terms of mindset. And there's a cost. If you have to shift to an earlier mindset to work with your situation, there's a cost. The cost is it might be boring. You might find yourself frustrated. You might not be feeling fulfilled. And there's something to consider if you have to live in that place all the time, but you might need to shift down for some situations. And then there's to shift up to later stages where you might need to stretch beyond your comfort zone to try something out, in which case you might need support or safety, and understanding that is important. So we talk a lot about range and what does it actually mean? And what I was going to say earlier was that the other three factors for growing vertically was colliding perspectives, getting different perspectives from folks, or building open networks, like networks that go beyond what you know. Reflection. Reflecting allows you to turn practices into deliberate practice. What did it actually take for me to do that? And how might I engage in that? Again, what do I need? And that's where this idea of support, what's the support that's going to make that possible? And then the fourth thing that's really important is what makes this worth doing in the first place? And the reason why that is important, that question, is because vertical growth is not easy. It asks us to be uncomfortable. And the more we can come back to the why am I doing it, the more we're actually growing ourselves vertically in terms of our sense of purpose.
Yeah. So how can people learn more about this? So you've got this instrument, you've got the VMI. How can they learn more? Or what's possible in terms of how they might use it for themselves, for their clients? What's possible?
Wow. There's so much that's possible right now because we really feel like we're kind of pioneering at the edge here with what we can do with online processes. So the VMI is on a platform called Adeption, which is a learning platform, and uses AI to both add crowd share learning as insights as well as deliver programs. So you coaches can become licensed to actually deliver the VMI, to purchase and use the VMI with your clients. And what that means is you get a subscription to being on the VMI platform and to use it with your clients and to be their coach online, as well as do coaching debriefs. What we've done is come up with a way to do the debriefs. So you can do the digital debrief. We can do a group debrief, which is where Nick Petrie, if you know Nick Petrie, he's my partner with this work. And I do group debriefs where we can do anywhere from 20 to 100 people in a group session, along with the digital debrief. And we do one-on-one laser debriefs, which are half-hour coaching sessions where we very quickly, but it feels like it's very spacious for some reason, get to what your developmental edge is and what that means for next steps. So what we do is we work, the practitioner licensing program is all about learning how to do that and learning more about going a deeper dive with the stages. And then we have a whole community built around that, which supports you in building your coaching work with that, with this body of work. And we're also creating a whole suite that builds off of the VMI. And that suite has what we call a bunch of workouts. These workouts are online processes where you can go through and see how other leaders at different stages have handled different challenges. So you can see from different leaders. So we're curating that right now, or you can build range, or you can figure out how to work with complexity. We've got one for working with teams with the VMI. So we're building that suite now, and it should be out later this year. That people who complete the VMI can then go to and do these workouts to take it further. So that's some of what you can do. And the VMI can be rolled into regular coaching engagement. It works really nicely next to a Leadership Circle 360 or 360s. There's lots of different ways that you can incorporate it with coaching and also using it with teams. I'm trying to think what else was in your question there, Allison. What else can you do with the VMI?
And they would, if they got licensed, they'd learn about vertical development as well. It's not just, a tool, and they actually get to learn about all the stages of development and what they mean. And yeah.
I think it's really helpful. And we're getting incredibly strong response from this when we talk about it this way. It's really helpful to think of the VMI less as an assessment and more as an experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are really robust assessments out there for vertical development. And if that's what you want, they're expensive, but it might be worth it to you to explore, through the MAP or the GLP or the SOI. Those are really good tools if that's all you want. We're really clear that this should not be a standalone assessment, because it's the VMI and the digital debrief at minimum that gives you that sense of where might you be, where's your mindset gravity, tendency, and check it out through these questions to see what that actually means for you.
Yeah.
Think of it as a map, not a yardstick.
Roberta Riga is asking about the alchemical stage. Is that a different model?
The alchemical stage is the last one that we are scoring with the VMI. There's actually one after that too, but we're not going to even attempt to score it. So the alchemical stage, I believe there's about 1% of the population assesses that at that stage. And that's a mindset where it doesn't show up a whole lot in the business world. And the reason is because people who show up at that mindset often don't have a lot of tolerance for or aren't easily tolerated by folks in the workplace. They tend to, the lines that we have that define us and systems and what's good and bad and appropriate and all that are very, very fine, almost invisible. We're often questioning a lot of assumptions in a way that people don't find helpful, but yet we can't help but see. Things like, well, maybe the business doesn't need to exist anymore. Maybe we've done our time and maybe it's time to let go and evolve into something else.
Wow.
Let's explore what that might be like. The sense of emergence is very prominent with this mindset. So people with this mindset are very, very comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty to the point where they may really not get that other people don't have that same level of tolerance. If they're leading, they're often leading very quietly behind the scenes, almost like Merlin. Another term for this mindset used to be magician. They kind of have a way of moving things and shifting things around to put people in places and make things happen. And then they just kind of back away and you don't even know they were there. So there's a real, that's why it's alchemical, real alchemical sense about them. And it also speaks to, it's a great question, and it speaks to this idea that even though we talk about range of more than a couple stages, mindset stages in an organization is truly, truly hard. Yeah.
Yeah, so we just have here another 7 minutes left. Who wants to raise their hand, ideally their virtual hand, and maybe ask a question? I know, Pamelia, you had a question that you offered in the chat box. Do you want to voice that, or did we move past that?
I think I was asking whether the stages were like chronological. Did you move through them in sequence? And then I heard you say something about range. So I assume that you may fall in the middle of a range or something somewhere. So I was just curious about that.
Rose drawing the picture there for us. So great question, but yes, both and. It's a both and, which, depending on which mindset stage you get that, right? They are chronological in that you have to move, we call that include and then transcend. You need to do the work of one stage to have the capacity to truly be in the next stage. So you can't skip a stage, and you can lean back to an earlier stage, which we actually call being in a state, or stretch into a later stage, which we call being in a state. Knowing that it costs something to do that. You can do that. What does that mean to do? And that's what we call building range, which is a growth choice. There's growth paths. You can grow by consolidating and doing the work of a mindset stage. You can be transitioning to a later stage, and you can be building range. Those are all three different growth paths that can go with this work. But yeah, if you are going from expert to redefining by skipping achiever, it doesn't work. You can fake it. You can read a book about, Eckhart Tolle's books on, be here now and mindfulness, but you're going to want to follow the steps bit by bit because you don't quite have the capacity that you build in the achiever stage to know how to, that doesn't have to be that exact.
Yeah. So let's see if we can take a couple questions. Hey, Paul, good to see you. Question?
Hi, good to see you too again, Allison. I'm a neophyte to the vertical development world, but I'm wondering about the origins of how vertical versus horizontal came. In neurological development, right? There's the brainstem, limbic system, prefrontal cortex, and then the bilateralization of the hemispheres. And what the prevailing wisdom is in the clinical circles is it's top to, or it's bottom to top, right to left. So I'm wondering, is that where vertical and horizontal comes from? I'm just wondering if that's related.
Not that I know of.
Okay. All right.
I mean, honestly, I think it was sort of made up as a distinction for people to understand the difference between skill or competency and
Gotcha.
capacity.
Yeah, I know that definition. I was just wondering if it had origins in that. Yeah.
No, that would be an interesting hypothesis, though.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Jan, if there was one resource people could consume as their first foray to learn about vertical development, what would it be?
What I would suggest is, we have a white paper we just put out called A Leader's Guide to Vertical Development.
Mm-hmm.
So can we get that out to people somehow, Allison?
Sure.
Okay.
Maybe we'll follow up with you on it.
Yeah, we'll get that out to everyone. And that has some real basic stuff that you could also share with your clients about it. My colleague, Nick Petrie's website, he's got some great white papers there. So that would be Nick Petrie, and I can send that.
What's your favorite book on this topic?
I don't have one yet because I don't think it's been written. Maybe I will do that with Jane Prin's encouragement there. Certainly, Leadership Agility by Bill Joyner and Stephen Josephs does a nice bit of trying to make it practical. They have a nice chapter in there, chapter 2, called The 5 Eds, which gives some nice descriptions. They use different names for the stages, by the way. That's one of the things about this work that's confusing, is the stage names are different depending on who you model you go through. Certainly Jennifer Garvey Berger's book, Changing on the Job, is a fabulous resource. Once again, different terms for the stages. She uses Bob Keegan's model, but she gets a really nice job at this idea of structure of interpretation. And we're actually changing the structure of how we shape the world.
So here's Jan's information. Roberta was just asking for your email address. So here's how you can follow Jan on all the socials, and her email address, both personal and the VMI email address.
And do reach out if you're interested in the practitioner licensing program or anything else. That I have other resources. I have other articles that I can share too. Great.
So you can follow us on all the socials as well. We here at Learning in Action, we've got, we just started a 12-week EQ certification program. We're gearing up for the fall now. We're going to be in person in Vancouver. We're going to be in person in Seattle doing, oh my gosh, in-person trainings again. So if you're interested in that, you can learn more at the link here, and Megan will put that link into the chat box if you're interested. We also have a program coming up in the fall called the Mindful Coach Program, which is all about attending to coach as instrument, kind of coach as the instrument of the universe, doing this work that we do. Lots of fun. So thank you all.